Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the final live stream in what has become an epic journey through live broadcasting on the internet. Want to really start off today. Well, first of all, I want to introduce everybody. My name is Scott, and Vanessa is off to one side of me, depending on your browser. Say hi, Vanessa.
Hi, guys.
And our nearly fearless leader, which I now have dubbed him Tom Campbell, former NASA physicist. We are gathering evidence to disprove the simulation theory. It's an exciting time for us because we did reach our minimum and we keep going. We had a 10K backer yesterday. So this is our last live stream, but this is not the end of the campaign. We still have many more days to go. But the number one thing, just wanted to pass on to our audience. It's like we've got a crew here, like my homies are all showing up for all these live streams. And so just wanted to pass on a big piece of gratitude to everybody that helped get us here. In fact, somebody pointed out the other day on our comment section that, without the major backers, we actually would be under the thing. So I don't want to take away from the people that put in the smaller gifts, because those are just as important. But those major backers have put us into a great situation. So much gratitude to everyone. And of course, that kind of leads me to, I'm going to kick off everything, Tom, by sort of relaying something to you and then having you comment about it. It's because it's a kind of a spiritual concept, but literally last night I saw how it would apply to MBT. Long story short, I suffered a very intense emotional trauma when I was a young man. And ironically or not, what it led to was a relationship with gratitude for almost on a conscious daily basis for the rest of my life so far. And I've never really thought about how that would apply to MBT. And then last night, it kind of sank in that gratitude is a fear reduction technique. I'd never really thought of it that way, but it's informed almost every decision, that I've made in my life, is that if you feel grateful for the fact that you're here on this planet at this time, you're not as afraid to make certain decisions because you're just grateful for the opportunity to even make those decisions. So I'm kind of curious how gratitude fits into your view of MBT.
Well, you're right. It is kind of a fear reduction thing, but also, and maybe just as important, it's an other-centered concept. When you feel gratitude, it's not about you and your stuff and what you're doing and and how you are and your needs. It's about seeing that you are part of something much bigger, and that much bigger thing of which you are a part gives you opportunity, gives you experience, gives you the ability to grow and be and become and develop your potential, and however you decide to develop it, and being really thankful that you're in that situation. So it's not only other centered, but it's other centered with a kind of a thanks to that other out there that provides you with this ability to grow up here. And that gratitude then is a very good way to approach life, because it's an other centered. So that moves you in the right direction. If you feel, if you can feel that gratitude all the time, which often comes after, like you say, a personal experience where you almost lost that ability to be able to grow yourself up and become and actualize your potential. That was almost lost. And then when you almost lose something, you really think about it and you become aware of it, and that's true whether it's, you almost lose a loved one, and then they recover or whatever, or even you almost die yourself and then you recover. Suddenly, all that stuff that used to be important isn't important anymore. Suddenly you have a much bigger picture when you get to one of these, turning point moments. So yeah, very good, a very good thing. Gratitude is a great space to come from, a great space to stay in. Not only that, it always leaves you positive, because You're always happy to have the opportunity to, for another day, tomorrow's another day to excel, you can't have that attitude.
Yeah, there's a wonderful TED talk. It's a monk that talks about it, and if you look it up at some point, I believe he's German, but he had said, we've been we've been told all our lives that opportunity only knocks once. And he says, that's completely wrong. It knocks every single second that we're alive. You always have an opportunity to make a decision that will change your life. And so it's again, it's a TED talk. If anybody's interested, it's to me, it's the gospel. I watch it on a regular basis just to sort of reconnect with everything. So I appreciate that. I love having this opportunity to kind of throw some of these concepts at you, but I shall now step aside to the wonderful Vanessa, who will now inform us about our questions with the audience.
Okay, so this is a question from Andrew. Andrew's asked this a few times, so here I'm finally asking it to Tom. So Tom, have you heard of Alice Bailey and the Theosophical Society, who put forward the idea of spiritual hierarchy, a group of spiritual masters who are guiding humanity? Tom, have you met any of these masters?
Well, yes, I've heard of Theosophy and Alice and Annie Besant and C.W. Ledbetter and that crew that around the late 1800s, middle to late 1800s, early 1900s were kind of in a renaissance of spiritual understanding centered in Europe. They made actually they're still around today. If you go to a bookstore, I think it's called Quest Books. That's actually an outlet for the Theosophical, okay, for that society. I've got a lozenge here in my mouth trying to suppress a cough, and it makes it a little difficult to speak clearly. Anyway, Theosophy has been a spiritual thing for, I guess, more than 100 years now. In fact, they brought Krishnamurti here and tried to make him their guru, but he refused. He did not want to be the guru. He didn't want to lead an organization, but he did linger and stay and have a lot of wonderful conversations that you can get on YouTube still. A very spiritual and learned individual. So yes, they talked about the spiritual masters, which were a group of people who were trying to improve the quality of consciousness here on this planet. And that was kind of a job that they took on to themselves, that they would see what they could do to be of service. Well, that's what people who are very spiritual do. They want to, find a role where they can be of service and help other people grow up. And that's what these particular entities were doing. Most of them had incarnations here. So this particularly learning lab was a little dear to their heart. And they helped other people grow up. That was their mission. So yes, and that sort of thing, happens. We talk about that there is no end, right, to this growing up. It's not like one day we'll become enlightened and then we're done, and then we go play our harp on a cloud, for eternity. It's not like that. When you grow up, you want to serve. You want to help others. That's the whole point of growing up. You don't grow up to become self-centered, and get out of the game. You grow up to want to care about other people and care about their growth. So yes, indeed, there are those on the other side, if we want to say that, those that are non-physical, that are very, very interested in seeing what they can do to help the growth of humanity. And they've always been around, and they're not always the same group. Some of it comes and goes. People join, people, leave, do other things. But there's always been those in the non-physical interested in our evolution of consciousness and trying to help us. And we have those who have been the speakers, the people who have been channeled, like Seth and others, and it's all part of that same organization, if you will. Some of them kind of present themselves as masters of wisdom, and they give of their wisdom, and some approach us as being channeled. Some just work in the background. But yes, there are people trying to help us out here. from the non-physical. That's just the way it is. That's the natural way of things. Once you get to the point you can be helpful, then you want to be helpful.
It's interesting that, in amongst this, because I've looked at some of these people that, claim to channel and all that, but I think sometimes we get caught up in it because it's non-physical. It must be perfect and all-knowing.
Right. That is not the case. Yes, you don't get wisdom by dying. It's not like, oh, once I die, I'll know all the secrets.
Right.
Then I'll know everything. I'll know all the secrets and everything will be perfectly clear. It's not like that. Once you die, you don't know any more than you did, just before you died. But you do see a bigger picture in the sense that you realize that there is, something else. So you do get a little information there, but it doesn't really help you grow up. Growing up only happens by making good choices, not just by having something happen to you. You don't fall off a ladder and suddenly become wise, because of it. You may suddenly get precognitive dreams because of it, but you don't become any more grown up because of something that happens to you. And all those entities that you meet out there, they are doing the same thing you are. They're just not in the fast track. They are learning, they are growing, they are challenged. There are things they don't know, things they don't understand. And they're much like us, struggling to make as much of themselves as possible. So yes, you meet an entity, don't automatically assume that they know everything and they're brilliant and they have all the secrets in the world and you are the only one. We dense people here on this planet are really the ones that are all stupid and all the brilliant ones are out there. It's not like that. Out there, they are just as dumb and ugly and beautiful and knowledgeable as they are here. It's a mixed bag of all sorts of types of things at every level that you can imagine.
Now, you mentioned yesterday, Tom, we were asking about Bob Monroe and whether or not there was any contact with him and such. And we had mentioned that, you don't have contact with him because he's since moved on. And yet we also then have this discussion about entities that are trying to help us out here. Can you kind of put a little definition? I'm like, are these entities that either have been here and have moved on but have chosen to come back? How are those involved as opposed to just them saying, I'm moving on somewhere else?
Well, it depends on what you need. What you do depends on the needs you have for your own growth and what you can offer others. It's a balance between those two things. In the earlier part of your evolution, it's all about what you need to grow up. Growing yourself up is the key thing. You're not all that helpful to other people because you're not all that grown up yourself. So it's pretty much a focus on you growing up. As you grow up, though, now the focus starts to shift from your own needs, which are getting fewer and fewer as you evolve the quality of your consciousness, to the help you can be to others. So that shift focuses. So if what you need is to come back here and play some sort of role or help people here, as an embodied person, then you'll do that. If you can do something else effectively, then you may do that. So it depends on what you need and the ability and desire that you have to help others. You'll find a spot that works for you. There's always room for another pair of hands, to grab hold of the crank. So that depends. And you may switch that role. You may stay out and not reincarnate here for a fairly long time working in some other virtual reality, or working, like Seth, or like these ascended masters. Of course, that's just a metaphor. Ascended masters. We have that metaphor, and we think of that as this, this group of entities who are highly evolved that help us. But all of that's kind of metaphor. Like I say, those individuals, they come and go. They're not always the same person. All of them don't present themselves as masters. A lot of times they'll present themselves as, anything that you'll pay attention to, an angel, I guess, if you're religious, or just some voice out of the blue if you're not, or I guess if you're Moses, a burning bush, or if, you are into Eastern theology, it may be your ancestors or something else like that. So they present themselves however it is that they can help you the most. So it's not like these are all people, you know, who wear big robes and they sit with their legs crossed and, you know, long beards, and they just pontificate on high level, wonderful wisdom. That's one venue of which they can use to connect to people, but just one venue. So we call those the ascended masters, which sounds like kind of a glorious big thing, but it's really just people trying to help people.
Right. Yeah, ascended masters have to put on their metaphysical pants on just like everybody else. So. All right, Vanessa, let's go to the next question.
Okay, so Wanma is asking, Tom, is there a possibility that this could be a virtual reality within another virtual reality, within another, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, that's a possibility. But after saying that, let me say that there are a lot of things that are possible that aren't likely. Okay, so it is a possibility. Virtual realities can be nested. Okay, we can have we are in a virtual reality, and we obviously can produce virtual realities because we do that all the time. Now they're getting more sophisticated with goggles and platforms and other sorts of things. So we're producing virtual realities within our virtual reality. And we might one day, be able to produce a virtual reality that actually has avatars who have free will choices that will be made by individuated units of consciousness in that virtual reality. You see? So yes, we can create a virtual reality that will then have characters, avatars in it that can be played by consciousness. So yes, it's possible to do that, but it's not real efficient. You see, it's not that efficient for a computer. From a computer science viewpoint, you have a computer and it creates this virtual reality. Then that virtual reality creates another virtual reality. Well, when it does that, everything in that secondary virtual reality has to flow through the first one. So you don't deal with that secondary one, the virtual reality within the virtual reality. You don't deal with that secondary virtual reality directly. You can only deal with that through the first virtual reality. So then if that secondary virtual reality makes another virtual reality, now everything that have to deal with that has to deal through the first one, through the second one, into that one. You see, and pretty soon you've got this huge overhead that makes it hugely inefficient. It would be much better to just deal with each of those virtual realities individually. That would be a whole lot less, overhead to do that. So that's that's kind of the problem. And also, if we make a virtual reality, let's say, and it has avatars, and those avatars begin to be played by IUOCs, then that virtual reality depends on us. Those characters are in, say, our mainframe computer someplace. We're creating those avatars that have free will that are being played by consciousness. Well, we can have a power outage, and all of that just gets turned off. So it doesn't have the robustness as if it were an individual reality running directly from consciousness. It's dependent on everybody upstream. So think of them now, there's 10 of them all, 10 of them, one inside the next, inside the next, inside the next. And they're all this big, you can see just the huge problems that you have in doing something like that. There's all the dependency lines through all of that. If the one just 2 levels down has a power outage, then everything else, all the other virtual realities all the way down to the bottom, all disappear for a while, you see? So it's possible. Theoretically, you can say, yes, virtual realities can be nested, but it's not likely to be nested more than maybe 1 or 2 levels. After that, the overhead just gets to be too much. So the consciousness system can create all the seats it needs in virtual realities on its own. It doesn't need to have a lot of seats that are virtual realities within virtual realities because it's just too hard to do. So yes, possible. No, not very likely.
Okay. All right. Cheryl is asking here, Tom, in my opinion, you're an entropy lowering machine. Everything you do seems to lower entropy in one way or another. Can you talk more about how we can lower entropy in our own neighborhood after we have reduced our own entropy?
Yes, you can lower, as you reduce your own entropy, as you increase the quality of your consciousness, you will affect everybody around you in your neighborhood, where you work, where you go to school, whatever you do and wherever you go, you will affect everyone. You will help everyone that interacts with you grow up. Now, it doesn't mean you will make them grow up. They still have to choose to grow up, but you will make it a little easier for them to grow up, because just being around you who are grown up makes them smile, makes them feel better, makes them want to be like you, makes them want to hang around you because you're just a nice person to be around. And they see how you deal with things. They see how you don't get angry. They see how you don't get upset. They see how you're always positive. You only have positive things to say about people. You're never, complaining. And people like that are just nice to be around. And they help lighten up the area wherever they go. The light in that area just shines a little brighter. So just by fixing yourself, that's the maximum thing you can do to help your neighborhood and your larger neighborhood, everybody you interact with. And you will see, just by yourself growing up, your relationships will get better. The connections to other people will get better. They will start to grow up into a better relationship, because as your end of the relationship improves, it gives them the opportunity to improve their end of the relationship. So much risk in doing that. So that's how you help people grow up, is you give them an environment in which it's easier for them to grow. And what kind of environment is that? It's a non-judging, caring, loving environment. Because when you're in that environment, when you know that there's somebody who just likes you and they're just positive and they're not going to be negative to you no matter what you do. You could do the most outrageous thing and they'd still put their arm around you and give you a hug and tell you that you're okay. Well, when you're around people like that, that gives you the kind of the courage to stretch out a little, to take risks, to face that fear. Because, okay, maybe that fear, maybe you're not such a nice person inside, but it doesn't matter, because that person's going to care about you anyway. So now you can kind of take the risk of dealing with that fear and being more authentic. So you see, that's how you help other people grow up, is by growing yourself up and then just acting natural. And I got asked some time ago, I'm going to be a new parent. How do you be a good parent? It's a big thing. I've never done it before. A baby's on the way and I'm scared to death that I won't know what to do and I'll be a bad parent because I had bad parents. And, I know that's a problem. It affects the children. And my advice to them is, first, you get your own head on straight. First, you get yourself together. If you can get rid of your fears, then all you have to do to be a good parent is act naturally. Because without your fear, you will be a good parent. Everything you need to do to be a good parent will come naturally to you. You won't have to think about any of it. And you'll do everything right. And where you might make a mistake, you'll learn quickly from it. So that is not only true of parenting, it's true of life in general. If you get rid of your own fear, everything else in your life will begin to work much better. You'll be more successful at it. So it's just a general way of approaching life, is approach it with love, and you'll do as much as you can to help everyone else around you.
Amen. That's the first thing I could say to that. I actually had an experience with this just within the last 48 hours, having a discussion. We're seeing on social media a lot of people that are just very angry and trying to force change in this world. And I had this discussion with a friend of mine that's, he's pissed off and he's going to do something about it. And I was saying, well, start by becoming not pissed off. Get yourself into a place where, I truly believe this. I heard this said a while back that if you really care about the others, you get yourself into a space where you're making choices based out of love, because otherwise you're going to potentially make things worse if you're trying to force things out of fear or anger or whatever. So that is such a relevant thing to what we're experiencing in this world today, that so many people, we just need to find peace within ourselves, joy, love, and then we can make informed decisions based off of that energy.
Right. Well, once you become lower entropy, once you move toward love, you move out of the position of being part of the problem and into the position of being part of the solution. As long as you have fear and ego and belief, well, that as much of that you have, that's how much you're part of the problem. You're going to feed the problem. And people say, well, how are we going to save the world? How are we going to change this world from a nasty, greedy, bunch of users to people who care about each other? And there's only one way to do that, and it's not by changing governments. It's not by changing all the CEOs. It's not by rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. That's not going to do it. The way we do that is by changing ourselves, one at a time. And when we change, the governments, the corporations, the politicians, everybody else will change. All the institutions will change to reflect us. If we grow up, we don't have to worry about those institutions. They'll grow up too,
Exactly.
because they are a reflection of us. They represent us. And if we're a bunch of rowdy, greedy, self-centered people, we're going to have a bunch of rowdy, greedy, self-centered leaders that are going to be trying to manipulate us, because that's what greedy, self-centered people do. They try to manipulate other people. So that's how you save the world, by saving yourself first.
That's great stuff. All right, Vanessa, what's up next?
Okay, so Victoria is asking Tom about, she says, I'm curious about the validity of the law of attraction within a virtual reality, but within the limitations of this specific reality. Can one really manifest that dream job, that salary, vacation, solution to persistent health problems, like many illnesses we hear about? This ties in with the phenomenon of the placebo and the nocebo effects. Is in these concepts?
Yes, there is validity in the concepts, but the concepts are a little unbalanced and not necessarily the whole picture. The kind of the root cause that allows these concepts to even exist is that you can modify future probability with your intent. Okay, your intention can change the probability of what happens. That doesn't mean that you can always manifest whatever it is you want. All you can do is change the probability of something that happens. So if there's something that's going to be, 1 in 100,000 that is going to happen, you can change that, if you're a wizard, all the way down to a 1 in 1,000 instead of 1 in 100,000. You've changed it 100 orders of magnitude. Wow, you are a powerful wizard, but it's still not likely to happen. You see, so it depends on the probabilities. It depends on how strong a wizard you are, or in other words, how much probability can you move with your intent, because all intents are not the same. Intents coming from the intellect are very weak. They don't move much probability. Intents coming out of ego and out of belief don't move much probability. Okay, so if it's if what your intent is you want a prettier girlfriend and a new Mercedes Benz, because that'll enable you to really show your stuff and people would look at you and be envious. Well, that's a very, very weak intent. It's for the wrong reasons. You see, so your intent has to come from the being level, not from the intellect, and it has to have force behind it. It can't just be, it's not like throwing a penny in a wishing well and making a wish. That's an extremely weak intent. So the intention has to be clear, it has to be focused, and you have to hang on to it almost all the time. In other words, you can't do this one time, like the penny in the wishing well, make a wish and then walk away. You have to keep that intent in your mind, in your being level. You have to keep putting energy, and energy, I'll put little quote marks around energy. You have to put energy into it continuously, from the right place, in the right way, without noise. And if you do that, you will tend to shift the probability toward that being possible. Doesn't mean you're going to get it. It just means you'll shift that probability. Sometimes you have to be very careful about what you wish for. Sometimes you'll get what you wish for, but there will be circumstances and unintended consequences that you didn't think of, and it will not really work out the way you imagined it to work out. That's called a lesson, and the system will often give you lessons like that. So be a little careful, beware of what you ask for. It may not turn out to be what you want.
In fact, almost all the time, I sort of get the feeling, I don't think anything's ever quite worked out as the way I intended them in my life. It's more the humility to roll with what the universe decided your outcome was going to be. All right. Well, what have we got next?
Yeah, Daniel is just asking, can you give an example of good, clear, focused intent?
Well, yes. One of the reasons why almost all spiritual practices begin with meditation is because meditation is a tool for you to learn how to quiet the noise in your mind. So that's one of the things you have to do for a focused intent. And that is, most people's minds jump around all the time. And those of you who have tried to meditate for the first time realize that, because in meditation, you're supposed to be thoughtless. You're not supposed to have any thoughts. And the first time meditator usually finds out they can last maybe 3 seconds without a thought. And then a thought comes flying through their mind. And they put that out of their mind. And then in another 2 seconds, another thought comes through. And so it is. They have a hard time controlling their mind even for a whole second. And the average person walking around who doesn't meditate regularly is like that. Their thoughts are zinging everywhere all the time, all sorts of things. Well, what am I going to do next? Well, is the car full of gas? Is it not? Is this? Is that? What's for dinner? Oh, what about that meeting with so-and-so? And my boss, he's going to, promote somebody. And am I, just all this chatter's going around in your mind all the time. That is noise. That's not really productive stuff. And if you have that chatter running around in your mind, like the average person does, that makes your intent a weak one, non-focused. So when I talk about a focused intent, I'm talking about one that's noiseless, where you can bring up that intent at your being level and hold it steady and clearly and keep your attention on it while you do other things. So it requires a little bit of parallel processing. So you can keep that intention there at the being level while you go about your life. Okay, that's the second thing. That puts more oomph into it. That puts more energy into it. It's an additive thing. If you just do it once, like making a wish, well, that may change the probability just a tiny little bit for a tiny little while. You have to keep putting that effort into it over time. It's cumulative. So that's what I mean by a focused intent. Now, it has to be a clear intent if you really know exactly what you want, and more importantly, why you want it. And if the why you want it is out of your ego and your belief and your fear, that's not a strong intent. The why you want it is really important, not just what you want. So if the why is a good thing, is an entropy lower, is a thing that makes, it's going to make you a better person and going to help other people become better people, now that's a stronger intent. You see, that's going to move more probability than if it's an intent because you have a belief, or you want a new Mercedes-Benz to impress your friends. That's a very weak intent, and those things are not likely to manifest. So there's a lot that goes into this quality of an intent. So you have to be clear about what and about why. If it's fuzzy, I just want something to, make me feel better, or, give me more status, or, I want to, find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or I want to do whatever. If it's kind of fuzzy like that, it's not real specific, then you'll get a fuzzy result. Fuzzy intents create fuzzy results. And your result will not be very specific. It'll be something perhaps, but not specific. So that's what I mean by clarity of an intent. So if you want to have stronger intents and you're not a proficient meditator, I'd say start with meditation. That'll help you clear the noise out of your mind, because a noisy mind just doesn't have a high enough signal to noise ratio to really do much. So that'd be the place to start, is become a good meditator. Get the point consciousness where you're nothing but a point of consciousness floating in the void. No thoughts, nothing, only an awareness that you exist. It's kind of the Descartes moment. I exist. That's all you are. And if you can hold that steady for an hour, all right, now you're there. You've already, you've got the quiet mind, you've got the noise. Now all you need is a worthy intent, and you're on your way. So meditation comes first for the most part. Now, meditation doesn't have to be formal. People meditate by, gazing, out the window, or listening to music, or any number of things. It just means being quiet and emptying your mind. You don't need any particular process. You don't have to pay money to have somebody teach you how to meditate. It's just a matter of being quiet and getting to know your own consciousness without all the jabber going on in your head.
Yeah, step one, go for a long walk in the woods. That's a great way to kick things off. We have reached just past the halfway point, so I am going to circle us back to where we were at the top. Just again, expressing gratitude to our audience. This is our last live stream, but the campaign is not over yet. We still have several days to go, so we'd love to see if we can get that number to continue to grow. But we are grateful to all of you for getting us this far along. Again, this is our last live stream, but it is not the end of the campaign. So please continue to work with us. And let's go on back to our crowd and figure out what the questions are. Vanessa?
Okay. So let's see here. Next question from Rodriguez. He says that I understand that the particular experiments you are proposing, although might provide evidence that our physical reality is actually a virtual reality, they do not provide evidence for the larger consciousness system, which is just one of a few virtual reality theories. For example, this virtual reality could be generated by someone from a very advanced civilization that lives outside of this physical realm. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, your understanding is correct. But all virtual reality hypotheses are not necessarily the same. And I believe, of course, this is my opinion, my opinion only. I believe that the idea that there is a larger consciousness system seems to be the most logical of the group, and the one that has the fewest problems, and the one that actually solves solves a lot of I was going to say problems, but that's not the point. Hits a lot of data points. It explains things. The others don't necessarily explain things. So if you have a larger consciousness system that works pretty much the way my model is, then you can explain things like, how remote viewing works. You can explain things like the placebo effect. You can explain things about mental healing. All of those paranormal things become normal things. Whereas if it's an advanced humans, in the future, well, none of those things get any explanations. So if you have this larger conscious system, not only do you explain the paranormal, but you also explain theology to a large extent. You can understand kind of the origins of theology. You also can explain. You would explain that in either one. You can also explain things like the probability distributions in quantum mechanics. Why should particles be probability distributions? Okay, well, that comes because the system that's computing it is a system that works on probability. That's how that's how it generates the data streams. Most of that is probabilistic in its creation. So particles being probability distributions, well, that's just a metaphor that is better than any other metaphor for the way the system actually works. So the idea that there's a larger consciousness system just seems to explain a lot of things. The precognitive dreams get explained that way. Things that you just know without any reason for knowing it. The connections that people have between each other. People who are very, very close, who can finish each other's sentences and know what each other's thinking. Things like that. Those sorts of things happen a lot. Matter of fact, if you do a survey, well, the surveys have been done where they ask people, have you ever experienced anything paranormal? Have you ever experienced anything that really was totally unexplainable to you in any physical way? And it's somewhere around, 78, 79, 80% of the people say, yes, I have experienced those things. So we're not talking about just a few crazy people, having hallucinations. These are real events, real things that you can go on the internet and look at, say, remote viewing, and you'll find there's really solid research there. Paranormal things, the materialists would have you believe it's only kooks and crazy people who have ever experienced these things, and they don't really happen. But there's a lot of really good, solid science that says these things do happen. And these things have been scientifically and very well studied and have been for a long time. So it answers a lot of other questions besides, just being part of the simulation theory. So the idea that we have this larger consciousness system is has a lot more going for it, I think, than the others who are kind of one-dimensional in that they just give a reason why this might be a virtual reality. So that's one thing that's different about them. The others I can find kind of logical faults with, for the most part, things that just don't add up. Sort of like when we started out, you can have a virtual reality and a virtual reality and a virtual reality, and yes, that's possible. And logic would say that if we're a virtual reality because our ancestors are creating us, then it also has to be likely that our ancestors are also, or not ancestors, our forebears, the people that are creating this virtual reality are also a virtual reality, because the same thing applies to them that applies to us. And that means it's also, the same logic would hold that the people who are creating the people who are creating us are also in a virtual reality, because the same logic applies to every set. You see, it's not like that logic that makes us a virtual reality with that ancestor thing, that we're the ancestors basically being in this virtual reality. That logic, if it holds for us, it has to hold for each one of them in the same way. And you end up with an infinite series of virtual realities. And as I discussed earlier, that's possible, but it just isn't practical. It doesn't make good sense. Reality can't work that way. It's too inefficient. Reality, evolves, and evolution tends to evolve toward efficiency, not toward monstrously, inefficient processes. So yes, there are other theories, but they all have flaws, logical flaws that you can point out that say, well, yeah, that really doesn't make sense. And I think most of these theories have been arrived at by materialists trying to preserve materialism. Okay, this is a virtual reality, but it's the real material world is creating it. You see, now we've made this a virtual reality because that's what the physics tells us. But at the same time, we've preserved materialism at the same time. So that's a very, that's the place that scientists would rather go with it, because that feels warm and cozy to them, that you still have their materialist base. But, there's logical flaws in it. It doesn't actually, that logic doesn't work very well for multiple reasons. So that's kind of the issue. So these experiments, if they work the way I hope, they will not only point a very strong finger at this being a virtual reality, but in order to explain them as part of a virtual reality, the fact that there is a larger consciousness system and that consciousness is the computer makes all the sense. It's the only thing that makes sense. If you have this hard problem of consciousness, nobody, from a materialistic viewpoint, can create consciousness. It just somehow magically jumps out of the brain, and we don't know how that works. It seems kind of impossible, so impossible that we call it the hard problem, because it's really, really hard, because that's not the way it works. That's what makes it so hard. Well, if you have a larger consciousness system that's a computer, well, there's consciousness. Now you understand consciousness. We are consciousness. We're not avatars. It's not a physical world. Well, okay, there's a scheme that gives you consciousness. if you do it the way of it's, we are an ancestor simulation by future humans, you still got the same hard problem. It's not, again, the evolution of consciousness kind of is hard to show because it doesn't really make sense, because it doesn't really work that way. So this idea of having a larger consciousness system that's the computer just solves a whole host of other problems, other data points that are out there, other facts that we know that are out there in the world. It solves them. It makes sense. C is a constant. Particles are probability distributions. There's consciousness. There's all the paranormal things that have been studied by many different people, many different places. So that's the difference. One, the consciousness system kind of makes sense in the bigger picture, and the others seem to be kind of desperate theories to keep materialism alive and well.
I found it interesting in, some of the naysayers that we've seen throughout this thing. We're saying, that, Tom's already got the answers figured out. It's going to, influence everything. And I thought that was rather funny. That, if that was the case, that, that you would do experiments that could potentially prove you wrong. But also one of the things that, you said a while back that I found so refreshing was that the metaphor you used for, I guess, essentially the larger consciousness system is that it's like we're the bacteria in your gut, and we can know more about, the farmer that created the food that's coming into our gut than we can know about that larger consciousness system. It's not within our ability to understand it at this level.
Right. An infinite regression as a description of your cause, of why you exist or where you come from. An infinite regression is not logical. That's an illogical answer. So infinite regressions, you can just cross those off the board. They don't tell you anything significant. And the other thing that people jump to is it just popped out of nothing. That also is a non-answer, you see? So infinite regressions and it just popped out of nothing are both not valid answers to any valid question. But I just don't know. That's a real answer.
Right.
Okay. I just don't know. You just can't tell. And you can't tell because your beginning was the beginning of you. So you weren't around to watch your beginning because you hadn't begun yet, you see. So the forces and the things that came together that made your beginning are things that you can only know about secondhand. They can't be direct experience of yours because you didn't exist yet. See, it's the same problem we have with the Big Bang. The Big Bang creates all of reality. Oh, really? Well, where'd that ball of plasma come from? You see, well, it just popped out of nothing, or it's part of some, infinite regression. Well, no. To be honest, you just have to say, I don't know. Unless, of course, you have a virtual reality, and then you know where that ball of plasma came from. It was the initial conditions that were put in the computer before this virtual reality started to evolve. So now you've got an answer for that, you see, because you've gone back one bigger step back. You understand that. So we know where that ball of plasma comes from a virtual reality viewpoint. But we always will end up in that same thing. Once you're in the biggest picture that you can get, which for us is consciousness, well, where did the consciousness initially come from is a question that's outside of your ability to know, because you are consciousness, and no consciousness was around to see where consciousness came from initially. So all we can do is have conjecture and say, I don't know. And that's not a failure. It's an admission of kind of an ignorance that logically we just have to live with. You can't know everything.
Amen again. Well, we are starting to get a little short on time. What I'd like to do is try to grab a couple more questions, and then Tom and Vanessa, since this is our last stream, I'd like to turn to both of you for some parting thoughts and comments, but let's see if we can grab a couple of quick questions before we have to wrap up.
Sure. So Christine is asking about about sadness. So she had an aunt pass away, and she was feeling sad. And so Ted Vollers, when he passed away, even she was feeling sad. So her question is, Tom, do you ever experience sadness?
Oh, sure. Sadness is actually a part of love. Okay. And sadness comes out of love because you see people you care about, and the more you become love, the more people you care about. But you see people that you care about hurting themselves, being dysfunctional, creating pain for themselves. You see them in misery, and then you see them, their reaction to that misery is to do something that creates more misery. And if you love these people, you can't help but be sad. That's just the way it is. You can't help them. You can't go in and rearrange their life. You can't make choices for them. And even if you try to intellectually explain the problem, it's only intellectual and is likely to make it worse rather than make it better. The best you can do is just love them. You know, that's kind of your optimal response. Give them a hug, you know, tell them, you know, good things about themselves, whatever. But that's sad. So when you look out at the world and you see this world and you see it's so dysfunctional, it's so full of greed, it's so full of self-centeredness, so many people just exist to use others. That's the way they've been brought up. Well, if you can use others, then you're clever. You know, it's kind of the Brer Rabbit syndrome. You know, if you can outsmart everybody else and end up with their money in your pocket, well, good for you. You know, you're a winner. Well, that's not being a winner. That's really, in the big picture, being a loser. So all of that is sad. On the other hand, the way you deal with that sadness is to realize that we have to go through this. It's not like we can skip this step, that everybody can just suddenly, you know, be enlightened. You know, it doesn't work that way. We have to earn it. Everyone has to grow up by making choices. There's no way to avoid what we're going through. It's a necessary step. You can't get from A to C without going through B. It's just necessary. So we started out as potential, and part of that potential was to de-evolve as well as evolve. That's our potential. We get to make choices. We can make good choices and poor choices because we have free will. That free will potential, when put in a situation where there's crisis, where there's demands, where, you know, there's consequences, we'll start making choices according to the level that it has evolved to. Well, you don't start out evolution at the end point. You start out at the beginning point. You know, you always have to start at the beginning. And when you start at the beginning, a lot of those choices are not going to be real good, because that's the way you are at the beginning. You haven't evolved the quality of your consciousness yet. We have to grow out of our ego. We have to grow out of our fear. And there's no way to leap over that B in between A and C. There's no way to get to C. C being the place where most of us are low entropy. A being the place where we're all beginners. We can't leap from A to C. So you look at people, you see that they're miserable. It makes you sad, but you realize it has to be. It's just part of the process of growing up. And it is what it is. It is what it has to be. And it's progress. It's slow. And that's the agonizing part. You see the pain, and every day they get up and they make themselves some more pain for that day. And it has to be that way, though. So you accept it. It is what it is.
Right.
And now you don't have to be sad. You don't have to walk around, you know, upset and, oh, this is such a horrible place. I can't stand to live here. All of that is ego. All that is saying, this place isn't the way I want it to be. Well, things aren't always the way you want them to be. You have to deal with things the way they are. And the way you deal with that is being positive. You accept that things are the way they are, that people are the way they are, and you have compassion for them.
Yes.
You can't fix them, but you have compassion for them. And you don't walk around, you know, unhappy all the time because the world is a nasty place. It is what it is. You can find joy in it. There are a lot of good people in this world. You can find joy in it. You can find your own joy. You can find joy in helping other people. You can find joy in giving some of those people manufacturing their own pain a hug and telling them that you love them. If you do nothing else, oh, it won't fix them, but it does actually make them feel a little better. So you can take joy in all of those things. So you don't have to be a sad sack in this miserable world. You can be a little point of joy, a little point of light that smiles and is happy to be here. And that's the thing. But yes, sadness, it is sad, but it is how it has to be. So, we accept it, we go on, and we do it cheerfully with a smile on our face and happiness in our heart.
My brother's last book, and yes, this is a plug, was called The Gifts of the Dark Wood. And I think the operative word there is gifts. It talks a lot about, as much as none of us want to have to say it out loud, but it's oftentimes those hard times that end up being gifts to us in the long run. We just have to be able to get through them. So right there is the, inspiration to try to be joyful when we're going through sadness and things like that. So definitely resonate with me. Let's try to grab one last question and then we will circle back.
Yeah, well, just from Wanma. Wanma's asking, is hate an aspect of love?
No, hate is a fear-based thing. So, fear is the opposite of love. Hate is not the opposite of love. Hate is derived out of fear. People hate because they're fearful and because they're self-centered, because it's about them and there's something that they don't really like because it's not good for them, and then they hate. But all of that is is just ego. If you don't have the ego, then rather than hate, you have compassion. So the hate is a fear-based thing, and it's not a part of love. And no, you don't have to have equal amounts of hate and love or equal amounts of fear and love, and that is some kind of cosmic balance that you always need, equal measures of both. That's all nonsense. What we're trying to do is get rid of that fear and increase that love. And as much as we can do that, that's where we're going. That's where evolution is taking us. There doesn't have to be this balance. You don't have to have hate in order to have love. You can have love without fear. You see, it doesn't take one to define the other. That's a mistaken philosophy, that one defines the other. It does not. Love is defined by entropy, by being low entropy, by being positive, by helping the world be better constructed and organized and more cooperative. That's love. And fear is just the opposite. Fear is high entropy. So we can move ourselves, our society, our world, our species to being lower entropy, more love, less fear. There doesn't have to be any balance there. And you don't need fear to define love. They're both defined in terms of entropy. They don't have to define each other.
Well, we are getting towards the end of our time, and I've had this little crew of Tom and Vanessa and I for 10 live streams now. This is our last one. So to wrap things up, I just kind of wanted to give you each the floor for a bit. Why don't we start with Vanessa? Can you give us some final thoughts, impressions, and such from all this?
Yeah, well, just even what you're saying about love and hate, love and fear, I think it's really important because I hear that all the time as people say, oh, we need fear. We need fear because it protects us. It keeps us safe. But it's quite the opposite, right? It's that if we come from this place of love, we can act from a much more mature state of mind and a state of being where we're very calm and efficient. Whereas if we're riddled by fear, we act out in ways that we later regret often. So I just think that's very beautiful. I love being a part of this, Tom and Scott. I'm honored to be a part of this. It's amazing. And the conversation last time with you and Nancy, I felt so humbled to be there partaking in that conversation or to just be witnessing it. Very, very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Vanessa. Just before I say what I wanted to say, I want to comment the thing that Vanessa said. Fear does not keep you safe. Fear never keeps you safe. Don't confuse being fearless with being stupid. Those are not the same thing. Okay, you think fear keeps you safe because you don't go out in the woods at night when the bears are in mating season, and that fear is a good thing and it keeps you safe. No, you don't go out in the woods at night during mating season of the bears because you're not that stupid. You see, you have good sense. in any situation where you think fear keeps you safe, fear will do just the opposite. If you're fearful, you almost always do the wrong thing. You know, you turn and run when that will just make the prey, you know, make you look like prey, and you'll be chased. Where, you know, you have to be prepared. Fear will always make you do the worst thing. Where you need to act, you'll be frozen because of the fear. Where you need to think fast and be agile, you'll be clumsy and wadded up because of the fear. Fear does never protect you. It always makes everything worse. All right, now for what my little part in this, I want to thank everybody who's been a part of this Kickstarter program. It's just been amazing. If you would have asked me in the beginning before this started, what do you think you're going to make the 150? I would have said, well, that's a long reach. I hope so, but you know, that's a lot of money, and I don't know that we're going to make that. You know, we're going to give it a try, because with less than that, we really can't do much. So that's kind of our minimum. At least we can get something done. But we not only made it, we made it about the halfway point. We still had another half to go. And now we did another 50 on top of that. We're a little bit over the 200,000 mark, which is just amazing. I just want to thank everybody who's pitched into this, no matter how much you pitched in. Even if you just came here and listened to us talk, you know, if you're a part of this and involved, I thank you for being here, for being a part of it. It's going to enable us to take the next step. No, I don't know for sure how any of these experiments are going to turn out. If I did, I wouldn't need to do the experiments. You know, you have to look, you can't go into an experiment with the idea that you're right. You have to go into an experiment with the idea that you're going to find out what's right. That's the whole point of the experiment. So anyway, I appreciate the people here who are making it possible for us to do these experiments, to find out, to move the state of the knowledge further ahead. However the experiments come out, it's going to move the knowledge ahead. So it's a positive thing, no matter what happens. And I appreciate all of you who are donating to that. The second thing is that this is the last one, and we have not quite a week. We've got something like, 5 days or so yet to go. And it's not because we're just dropping out here at the end because we already have our money. It's because I'm not able to be here tomorrow. I get in a car for a long drive, and I'm going to be out of touch, involved in that I have to go to and be a part of, that I want to go to and be a part of. You know, it's family business, right? I like my family and need to stay involved in it. I can't just work all the time. So this thing, it's my my niece's wedding, and Pamela and I are going to this wedding, and it's going to be in Richmond, Virginia, and that's about a 11-hour drive from here. So I'm going to be in the car all day tomorrow, and then I'll be doing social things. And, you know, if I sneak away and bury myself in a computer while all the social things are going on, that wouldn't be very nice. So I can't do that either. So I'm just going to be out of touch for the next couple of days, because there's not only a wedding, but there's other family there. So while we're there, we're going to stop by and see, you know, brothers and sisters and other sorts of people. And I'll be back in about a week, and just about the time this Kickstarter's over. So that's why we're not going to do any more of these. Otherwise, we'd probably do one every day like we have been this week, right up until the end. But this wedding's been on the schedule for a year or more. So just family comes first sometimes. Most of the time, family has to come first. So that's it. Thank you so much. Vanessa, you are wonderful. You're doing a great job. And Scott, you were the best host ever. Obviously, you've done this before. You just stepped right into this role, and you've been amazing as the host of all of this. So thanks to the two of you, the other people who have run this. You know, I didn't run this Kickstarter campaign by myself. This thing has been orchestrated and managed by a group of people, and we couldn't have done it without them. Actually, I did very little of it. I kind of sit back and talk when I'm supposed to, and be quiet when I'm supposed to, and everybody else does all the work. So it's only because of the people who, and they're all volunteers. It's only because of people who care that we're able to do any of this. My whole organization, people like Donna and Keith who run MBT events, that's all volunteer work. Everything's volunteer. The fact that we have a couple of translations now in other languages, you know, for the MBT books. We have one in Brazilian Portuguese, and we have one that's really close to coming out with all 3 books in German. And all of that is just because of volunteers. So, you know, if you want to volunteer, well, you know, you can step up and do that. There's usually something to do. But that's the way this organization works. It works out from people who care. And that's where all this money's come from people who care. And that's what actually makes this world work. It's people who care. So thank all of you.
Amen. Yeah, and I think that's as good of a close as we can have. Thank you very much to everybody who made this possible. Again, we are still, the Kickstarter campaign will continue for another 5 days, so tell your friends. But I want to close on the note of gratitude. We appreciate everybody, the guest hosts that have joined us, the crew. You guys have been fantastic. So I will sign us off with a note of gratitude, and hopefully we'll see you guys on the other side with more live streams and more updates. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.